Hello, I'm Sebastian Michael, and this is this Saturday's Sonnet. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked, red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant, I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet, by heaven, I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. And this is the extraordinarily startling, in a way, frank, a little bit unflattering, one should also say, Sonnet 130, the first of the Dark Lady Sonnets in the series of Saturday Sonnets that we're going to talk about in detail, because the first of the Dark Lady Sonnets really is 127. Now, this means we are into a completely different kind of poetry here, written in exactly the same format, in exactly the same structure, to a completely different person, in a completely different style. And when I say that we are into a completely different section of the sonnets here, which we clearly are, I should also remark immediately that this does not necessarily mean that we are in a different story. The story may in fact still be the same. We are going, as you know, in Saturday Sonnet simply by the words, and we'll get by and by to the pointers that hint at this quite intriguing and quite thrilling possibility that although these sonnets are obviously published in a certain sequence that is much debated about and talked about how correct this sequence is in the first place, in other words, how much it reflects the sequence in which they were written, and also, now that we are in the Dark Lady Sonnets, very strongly whether these Dark Lady Sonnets are a completely separate entity, in other words, whether they are written after the Fair Youth Sonnet to a dark lady about whom we don't know who this is, or whether, notwithstanding the fact that they are published in sequence and that the numbering goes through from 126, which is the last of the Fair Youth Sonnets, to 127, which is the first of the Dark Lady Sonnets, whether that fact notwithstanding, they actually overlap, they dovetail. And we are going to come across interesting pointers that suggest this is indeed a possibility. So, what's happening? Well, what is happening is that I, the poet, have started writing sonnets not only to my beloved, the fair youth, who I'm clearly besotted with and who I clearly have a very strong, over time, and stronger connection with. We've dealt with all that. I've also, at one point, started writing sonnets to a mysterious, dark lady. And if we don't know who the fair youth is, although we can make some guesses, we know even less who the dark lady might be. And again, all we can do here is really clasp at some straws and try and put a few pieces together and just speculate who this might be. But as with the Fair Youth Sonnets, in the Dark Lady Sonnets we get some pointers as to the characteristics of this woman. And so while we may never, and I can put this right at the beginning of this part of the series, while we may never really know who the Dark Lady was, we kind of get to know her a bit as well, and we get quite a good idea for the kind of person that Our William Shakespeare here is having a very, very interested and a very conflicted and a very troubled in so many ways relationship with. Let's first of all look at what this means and then see how we got to here. Because I think this sonnet is in itself so extraordinary and really quite so special that it really warrants looking at just on its own for a little moment. So, what does it mean? Sonnet 130. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. This is usually understood on its own. When people quote this particular line, they very often make the categorical mistake of thinking that this is a compliment. And of course it's a backhanded compliment. It starts off like a compliment, saying, in the vein of shall I compare thee to a summer's day? What happens next in that sonnet? What comes next is thou art more lovely and more temperate. You are even better than a summer's day. Here, my mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. The eyes of our mistress, they are not anything like the sun. This doesn't need further translating. We are expectant of the poetry of compliments and praise to this woman's beauty that's about to come. But I have slightly different ideas. Coral is far more red than her lips red. I beg your pardon. Say that again. Aren't red lips the epitome of desirability on a woman's face? Well, yes, they are actually, even in Shakespeare's day. But coral is far more red than her lips red. I see. This is going slightly a different direction, is it? Oh yes, it is, because this is what comes next. Again, I don't need to translate that line. It absolutely means what it says. If snow be white, and of course snow is white, why then her breasts are dun. Dun is a kind of darkish complexion, a sort of darkish, beigeish, kind of brownish, greenish complexion, not very attractive on a person's, put it this way, not very, because we have to be a little bit careful how we phrase things here. We live in very different times to what Shakespeare was living in, but also the ideal of beauty in Shakespeare's day for an English woman was absolutely that she would have pale skin, white skin. A tan was not considered attractive, partly because of class status. If you acquired a tan over time, then that meant that you were out in the sun, and you were only out in the sun if you were forced to be out in the sun, either because you were homeless or because you were a peasant spending your time out in the sun, because that's where you found daylight and that's where you could do your work, or because you were working in the field. So if you were a lady in Elizabethan England, your ideal of beauty was to be as snowy white as possible. And really we need to separate this completely from ideas of race and skin colour. From an ethnical perspective, there is an ideal of beauty in England at the time which absolutely favours very pale skin. And you can see this reflected, of course, not only for this reason, but particularly also for this reason, in the looks of the Virgin Queen, Queen Elizabeth I. There is, of course, also this virginity, this untouchedness that she represents in her white mask, but also the ideal of beauty. She is the ideal woman in oh so many ways, the Queen. Not so our dark lady. If snow be white, why then her breasts are done. And it's interesting that I start talking about her breasts, first the lips and then the breasts are next. So clearly I have seen these breasts, and I insinuate strongly that I've seen more than just the normally visible part of the breasts. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. Well, if hairs be wires, this is a little bit of a word play. In the Elizabethan ideal of beauty, hair, golden hair especially, was likened to golden wires, the wires of angels. So wires in the first part of this sentence, in the first part of this line, are a good thing, a beautiful thing. If hair be wires, as in golden wires, if that's the case with beautiful people, then in my lady's case, well, her wires, they are black. They are kind of different kinds of wires. They're sort of strong black wires that grow on her head. And now we know what we're into. We're into the deconstruction of this poor lady's looks. This is not a love poem addressed to a wonderful, beautiful being. This is a kind of a critical assessment of my mistress's faults. Can you imagine? Who would do such a thing? Well, I, the poet William Shakespeare, clearly am doing, and I'm continuing this for a good few lines more. I have seen roses damasked red and white. Well, damask roses are these red and white two-tone roses, and they are very beautiful, and I've seen them. But no such roses see I in her cheeks. These white, beautiful, fresh faces of a young virginal lady ought to have a little bit of a rosy cheek. Rosy cheeks are a sign of youth and desirability. And this rosiness that the damask gives you, where you have rose and white, we have pink and white a little bit together, that's meant to be extremely attractive. And my lady doesn't have this. I don't see that in her cheeks. And in some perfumes, is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks? Word of caution there, the reeks to us sounds horrendous. It sounds like she's got bad breath. Well, she probably has a little bit bad breath, especially by our standards, but reeks is not quite, this doesn't have quite so strong a meaning in Shakespearean English as it does in ours. For us, if something reeks, it has a really horrible odour. In Shakespearean English, reeks is a little bit more mild. Something can reek and just means that it gives off a certain type of scent. But I'm not suggesting here that this is a good scent that I like, because there are perfumes that offer more delight. And I'm not particularly fond, incidentally, as a little bracket, I'm not particularly fond of either makeup or of artifice when it comes to personal beauty. I profess a strong preference on numerous occasions during these sonnets, and in fact in the plays as well, for a natural look and a natural appearance. But perfumes are still preferable, really, to the breath of my lady. I love to hear her speak. Yet, well, I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I love to, I like to listen to her. That would suggest that there must be a reason for that. I mean, this does not come through strictly, but maybe because she's intelligent, maybe she's witty, maybe she's entertaining. But the sound is not so pleasing. Music hath a more pleasing sound than the tone of voice of my mistress. I grant I never saw a goddess go, meaning when I look at my mistress, I do not see a goddess go. Because you know how when I'm in love, I may well compare you to a god or a goddess. I've certainly told my fair youth that he is a god in love to whom I am confined. Here, not so much the case. I never saw a goddess go, because my mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. That means she's really, really human. She plods along in a very mortal way when she goes. She shuffles along there. You get an image, don't you? It's hilarious. It makes me laugh a lot. And yet by her, and this is where he redeems himself as a writer a little bit, and as a lover, and as a gentleman, if you can still call me that, having written these lines. And yet by him, I think my love as rare. For me, she is as special, as rare, as any she belied with false compare. The false comparison, the erroneous or the wrongful comparison, and she belies, meaning that they are shown up to be false. She gives them the lie, so to speak. She shows them up as being lied about by this false, by this wrongful, by this erroneous, by this inappropriate comparison. If you compare other ladies to goddesses, this is wrong, this is false, and my lady shows this up, and for me she's as special as any of these other ladies who are shown up to be actually fake, I think is what we were looking for, the word fake. and Shakespeare is disdainful of falsehood and fakeness. So this is where we're at. We are in a sonnet, in a piece of poetry that is really the format of the love poem, addressed to a woman who is of a darkish complexion. We don't know who she is. We certainly don't know her origins. There's much speculation. We think that she has dark hair, black hair, that she has dark eyebrows, black eyes, and that her complexion is somewhat dark. Probably not what we would call a black woman. She's most likely Southern European, maybe Southern Eastern European. We really don't know, but we do know that she does have a darkish or a darker complexion. She may be of African origin or mixed race. We absolutely don't know. All we know is that she does not conform to the beauty standard of her day, and that I say, to me, she is as rare as anybody else. So I give her many, many backhanded compliments there, and the conflict within which I am caught here is already very, very clear. I obviously have a great liking for and desire, very possibly, for this woman, although I don't say so here, but I do in other of these dark ladies songs say so, and I find it difficult to reconcile that with myself. And I keep, not only in this sonnet, but I do reiterate now and then how special she is to me. And we get the impression that she is generally special. In other words, that she is not of an ordinary ilk, that she stands out. Both, it has to be said, in her looks and in her behaviour as well. And so let's look briefly also at how we got here, because this notion about her behaviour is, or her conduct, or her position in society becomes also quite important, especially when then we also at one point become aware that the fair youth also is involved in this part of the story. But let's go back to 127, and 127 already sets the tone about this standard of beauty and what is beautiful, and the notion of blackness being either beautiful or not considered to be so, or me, the poet, thinking it so anyway, in spite of what other people may think. In the old age, 127, the first of the Dark Lady Sonnets, begins, in the old age black was not counted fair, or if it were, it bore not beauty's name. So the synonymity of fair, something that is fair is also beautiful, is already taken apart here straight away by saying that in the olden days people did not consider black to be fair. Or, hang on, if we mean fair to be light, then certainly it wasn't meant to be, the meaning of black was never that it was bright or light coloured, but in the olden days it was also not considered to be beautiful. And in the tradition, the cultural tradition that Shakespeare grows up in, this is true for England, it has to be said, not globally speaking, obviously. He's talking about the English culture that he grows up in. But now is black beauty's successive heir? But now the new black is black in Shakespeare's day. Now everybody thinks black is beautiful, and this is a comment on how people are using makeup to darken their eyebrows and use eyeliner. And so suddenly my mistress is actually beautiful because she does have that. And here we seem to get a suggestion that the mistress emphasizes the darkness of her eyebrows and of her hair by using some kind of makeup. And without wanting to go into detail, in a nutshell, what I'm talking about here is the fact that the standard of beauty seems to be undergoing a change, and it becomes fashionable to use makeup, eye makeup. And here's somebody who has dark eyes, dark eyeliner, dark brows, and as we know from 130, dark hair. And that's how we start this fascinating sequence, on a short reflection on what is beauty and what is considered to be beautiful. 128, how oft when thou my music playest. I observe how my mistress sits at an instrument playing music presumably some sort of harpsichord, a stringed instrument with keys. And then I muse about how your keys kiss the inside of your hand, and how it really should be me who kisses you. The inside of a lady's hand was then, as it is now, and not just a lady as it happens, the inside of of a lover's hand is a very erotic, erogenous zone. And so in this second of the Dark Lady Sonnets, I leave aside her looks and how she is considered beautiful or fair or not, and I fantasize about kissing her and about her, and I make a few fairly strong insinuations, so there's some puns, and we get the impression very strongly that this is a woman I have a physical relationship, a sexual relationship with, to the extent that I feel somewhat envious of the instrument, the wooden instrument that she touches with her hand. It sends a little tingle down your spine just listening to it, doesn't it? Because it becomes quite sensual. You can sort of hear it. And then 129 is really a sonnet that I probably ought to do an episode about all in its own right, but I'm not going to. But 129, the expense of spirit in a waste of shame. Even this line, the expense of spirit, well, spirit is a word that has a double meaning. It is also the expense of a man's semen. It's also the sexual act in a waste of shame. And then I go on almost a bit of a rant, and you remember we had rants before, but is lust in action, and till action lust is purged, murderous, bloody, full of blame, savage, extreme, rude, cruel, not to trust, enjoyed no sooner but despised straight, past reason hunted, and no sooner had past reason hated, as a swallowed bait on purpose laid to make the taker mad, mad in pursuit and in possession, so had, having, and in quest to have extreme, a bliss in proof, and proved a very woe, before a joy proposed behind a dream. All this the world well knows, yet none knows well to shun the hen that leads men to this hell. It's like describing sex in itself in an almost sexual way. This is almost like building up to orgasm, having it, realizing what's just happened and thinking, what fuck have I just done? And then listen to the last two lines. I mean, this always in the context of having just fantasized about this woman. This now talking about essentially having sex with her, presumably we can assume, or with anyone, or with someone, and saying all this the world well knows, that this is what lust is, and what having sex is, and yet none knows well, but nobody knows to shun the hen that leads men to this hell. I end on the word hell. I'm in a hell. We don't know why. There may be pointers coming up a bit later as to why this is such a hell for me, but what an interesting psychological framework I'm in there. This is no innocent love, this is no infatuation, this is no admiration, this is all mixed messages, left, right and centre. There is lust, there is desire, there is need, there is a need to have sex and to want somebody, and then there is this realization, this is horrible for me, this is doing me my head in, it's a hell. How fascinating. I can't explain this at this point, not from the words, but we can take note of this and say, well, how fascinating that I, the poet, am in this state of mind here. Then we have 130, which I've just given you, and then I address the Dark Lady more personally again, because note, of course, also how in 130 I don't actually talk to my Dark Lady, I talk about her. And then in 131 I start talking to her again, and I'm not any less conflicted, but I say that even though you are not traditionally beautiful, you have exactly the same effect on me as somebody who is. You have me in your power. And then I'm going to leave it at that, because I'm going to cheat a bit by next week talking about one more of the sonnets that actually belong to this batch, if we're doing batches of 7, and there's no reason other than that I'm doing that, there is no contextual reason to do so, but I will want to talk in detail about 133. And so that's the thing we can look forward to, and that's where we're going to leave it at, because 133 is going to open up this already completely conflicted, complex and complicated relationship I have with the Dark Lady, by bringing into it my fair youth again. So, as though it needed to be, it's going to get a whole lot more interesting and a whole lot more multi-layered. But this is it. We're into the Dark Lady sonnets. We're into a whole different world, but very possibly in the same story. We are still in Shakespeare's sonnets. And remember, love is the power, and see you next week.